They had no machines, no fertilizers, yet their harvests sustained kingdoms. How did medieval farmers pull off what billion-dollar agriculture still struggles to do today? Medieval farmers figured out something that puts modern agriculture to shame. While we're busy dumping chemicals on our fields, they cracked a code that kept civilizations fed for centuries without destroying their land. Here's the deal. They rotated their crops like a well-orchestrated dance. 1 year wheat, next year beans, third year nothing. Sounds lazy? Well, that lazy year let the soil breathe and rebuild itself naturally. The three-field system wasn't just smart farming. It was survival. These weren't agricultural scientists with fancy degrees. They were regular folks who noticed their neighbors' fields turning into dust bowls while theirs stayed rich and dark. Makes sense, right? But here's where it gets interesting. When they planted wheat, it sucked nitrogen right out of the soil like a hungry teenager raiding the fridge. Then they'd follow up with legumes, beans, peas, clover, which actually pumped nitrogen back into the ground. Nature's own fertilizer factory, working around the clock. The results were staggering. Farms using crop rotation saw yield increases of up to 20%. That might not sound earth-shattering until you realize this was the difference between a thriving village and a ghost town. More food meant more people. More people meant more workers, and more workers meant stronger civilizations. Then there's the fallow year, letting fields rest completely. Your grandfather probably called this giving the land a vacation. While neighboring farms worked their soil to death, smart farmers let theirs recover. The weeds that grew actually helped, bringing deep nutrients to the surface and breaking up compacted earth. Modern organic farms still swear by this 1,000-year-old wisdom. They've learned what medieval peasants knew instinctively. You can't take from the land forever without giving something back. And the weird part is, we temporarily forgot this ancient knowledge during the industrial farming boom, only to rediscover it decades later when our soils started failing. Speaking of medieval innovations that changed everything, wait until you hear about the tool that literally carved civilization out of impossible terrain. Medieval farmers didn't mess around when it came to breaking new ground. Literally. The heavy plow changed everything. Before this beast showed up, European farmers were basically scratching the surface with lightweight tools that worked fine for Mediterranean soils, but were about as effective as using a butter knife to dig a swimming pool when it came to Northern Europe's thick, clay-heavy dirt. Here's where it gets interesting. The old Roman plows could barely penetrate 6 inches deep. Meanwhile, the medieval heavy plow, equipped with iron plowshares and wheels, sliced through soil like my mother-in-law cuts through family drama at Thanksgiving dinner. We're talking depths of 12 to 15 inches, accessing nutrient layers that had been locked away for centuries. But this wasn't just about digging deeper. The heavy plow required a team of 8 oxen to pull it. That's expensive. So what did medieval communities do? They pooled resources, sharing both the plow and the oxen among multiple families. Suddenly, farming became a neighborhood project. The results were staggering. Areas of Northern Europe that had been considered impossible to farm, thick forests with dense root-filled soil, transformed into productive agricultural land. Food production didn't just increase, it exploded. Some regions saw crop yields double within a generation. Then there's the interesting side effect nobody talks about. The heavy plow worked so efficiently in long, straight furrows that it completely changed how medieval fields looked. Those narrow, square Roman field patterns, gone, replaced by long, rectangular strips that maximized the plow's effectiveness. Well, this innovation didn't just feed more people, it freed up labor. When you can plow more land with fewer workers, suddenly you've got extra hands for other jobs. Craftsmen, merchants, soldiers. The heavy plow literally helped build the foundation for medieval towns and cities. Modern tractors still follow the same basic principle. Deeper cultivation means better yields. Those massive John Deere machines, they're basically the heavy plow's great-great-grandchildren, just with more horsepower and cup holders. Speaking of smart resource management, medieval farmers had another trick that made their land even more productive. Medieval farmers had figured out something that would make modern engineers jealous. They could move water uphill without electricity. Well, not exactly uphill, but close enough to make their neighbors think they'd made a deal with the local wizard. The secret was brilliant in its simplicity. They built networks of channels, ditches, and small dams that captured every precious drop of rainwater and redirected it exactly where crops needed it most. Think of it like medieval plumbing, except instead of delivering water to your bathroom, it delivered prosperity to entire communities. But here's where it gets interesting. The water wheel wasn't just grinding grain. Smart farmers used the same flowing water to power irrigation pumps and lift water to higher fields. One stream could do triple duty: power the mill, water the crops, and fill the village pond. Talk about multitasking before smartphones made it trendy. These farmers understood something we've forgotten today. Water doesn't just make plants grow, it makes civilizations possible. A single well-designed irrigation system could transform a struggling village into a thriving market town practically overnight. The results speak for themselves. Medieval farms with proper water management produce 30 to 40% more food than their neighbors. That's not just survival, that's abundance. And abundance meant people could do other things besides scramble for their next meal, like invent better plows, build cathedrals, or start universities. Here's the kicker, though. They did all this without computers, weather satellites, or engineering degrees. Just centuries of watching water flow and learning from their mistakes. Sometimes the old guy who'd been farming since he was knee-high to a grasshopper knew more about water management than entire government departments today. Modern California's massive irrigation networks, they're basically medieval water management on steroids, using the same fundamental principles those long ago farmers figured out through pure observation and necessity. And speaking of necessity driving innovation, wait until you hear what medieval farmers discovered about feeding their soil without a single chemical fertilizer in sight. Medieval farmers weren't exactly shopping at the local garden center for miracle fertilizers. Yet somehow they figured out something that would make modern organic farmers weep with joy. Their secret weapon? Good old-fashioned poop. And not just any poop. They turned manure management into an art form that rivaled their cathedral-building skills. Here's what blew my mind when I first learned this. These farmers understood soil chemistry better than most people understand their smartphones today. They knew that spreading animal waste wasn't just about getting rid of it. They were literally feeding the earth. But wait. There's more to this smelly success story. Medieval farmers mixed manure with wood ash, creating what we now call a premium soil amendment. The ash provided potassium and phosphorus, while the manure delivered nitrogen and organic matter. Think of it as nature's version of a multivitamin, except it actually worked and didn't cost $40 a bottle. They also composted kitchen scraps, dead leaves, and even human waste. Though thankfully, they kept that separate from food crops. Smart folks, those medievals. They understood that decomposition was basically nature's recycling program, turning garbage into gold. The results were remarkable. Farms using these organic fertilizers saw crop yields that wouldn't be matched again until the Industrial Revolution. Some historians estimate that proper fertilization increased medieval harvests by 30 to 50%. What's fascinating is how they timed everything. Farmers spread manure in fall, letting winter weather break it down slowly. By spring planting, the soil was rich and ready. No rushing, no shortcuts, just patient collaboration with natural processes. And here's the kicker. They never dealt with the soil depletion problems that plague modern industrial farms. Their approach built soil health year after year, creating farmland that stayed productive for centuries. Modern, organic farmers are essentially copying their homework, and for good reason. These medieval techniques prove that sometimes the old ways really were better. But even with perfect soil, medieval farmers faced another challenge that required serious cooperation. Ever wonder why medieval peasants didn't just grab their own patch of dirt and call it a day? Well, they had something way smarter figured out. The open field system was like the world's first agricultural co-op, minus the membership fees and awkward committee meetings. Here's how it worked. Instead of everyone hoarding tiny plots like medieval hoarders, entire villages shared massive stretches of farmland. Think of it as the agricultural equivalent of splitting a pizza, except the pizza was hundreds of acres and everyone got fed properly. But why share when you could be selfish? Smart question. Turns out pooling resources was genius-level thinking. One bad harvest could wipe out a family farming alone, but spread that risk across dozens of families? Suddenly, everyone's got backup. It's like having agricultural insurance before insurance was even invented. The system created natural checks and balances too. Can't slack off when your neighbors are counting on you, right? Plus, shared knowledge meant Farming techniques spread faster than village gossip. When old Henrik figured out a better way to plant barley, everyone benefited within a season. Resource management became incredibly efficient. Heavy plows were expensive, way beyond what individual families could afford. But split the cost among 20 households? Suddenly, everyone's got access to top-tier equipment. Same with oxen, seeds, and specialized tools. Then there's the labor angle. Harvest time was brutal, demanding all hands on deck for short windows. Individual families struggled, but entire communities working together, they could tackle massive fields before crops spoiled. It was like having a flash mob, but actually useful. Modern cooperative farms still use variations of this medieval wisdom. Community-supported agriculture programs, shared equipment initiatives, even neighborhood gardens echo these ancient principles. Turns out working together beats rugged individualism when your survival depends on dirt and weather. The social fabric this created was remarkable too. Shared responsibility bred genuine cooperation, not just neighborly politeness, but medieval farmers didn't stop at just sharing land. They discovered something even more fascinating about which plants actually liked hanging out together. Medieval farmers figured out something that modern gardeners are just rediscovering. Certain plants actually help each other grow better when planted together. It's like having the perfect roommate who always does the dishes and splits the grocery bill. Take the famous Three Sisters combination that medieval European farmers adapted from earlier traditions. Corn, beans, and squash weren't just randomly thrown together. The corn provided a natural pole for beans to climb, while the beans fixed nitrogen in the soil that fed the corn and squash. Meanwhile, the broad squash leaves created a living mulch that kept weeds away and moisture locked in. But here's where it gets interesting. Medieval farmers also discovered that certain plants could actually repel pests from their neighbors. They planted aromatic herbs like basil near their tomatoes, not just for cooking, but because the strong scent confused insects looking for a tomato feast. It was nature's version of a security system, and it worked better than a guard dog with arthritis. The practice wasn't limited to vegetables either. Farmers would plant marigolds throughout their fields because these bright flowers attracted beneficial insects that gobbled up harmful pests. Think of it as hiring tiny bodyguards that worked for nothing but nectar. What really amazes me is how they figured this out without any scientific equipment. Pure observation and trial and error over generations. They noticed that cabbage grew better near onions and that carrots actually improved the flavor of tomatoes when planted nearby. These weren't accidents. They were carefully documented discoveries passed down through farming families. Modern permaculture enthusiasts are basically rediscovering medieval wisdom, often calling it revolutionary, when farmers 700 years ago considered it common sense. The difference? Today we understand why it works. Allelopathy, nitrogen fixation, beneficial insect attraction. Back then, they just knew it worked. The beauty of companion planting lies in its simplicity and effectiveness. No chemicals, no complex equipment, just strategic thinking about which plants make good neighbors. Speaking of strategic thinking, medieval farmers also revolutionized how they used their four-legged partners in ways that would make modern sustainability experts jealous. Medieval farmers figured out something brilliant that modern agriculture is desperately trying to rediscover. They made their animals work double duty in ways that would make today's efficiency experts weep with joy. See, back then, you couldn't just run to the store for fertilizer or rent a tractor for the weekend. Your cow wasn't just a milk machine. She was your personal soil improvement specialist. While she grazed, she was basically doing unpaid landscaping work, dropping nitrogen-rich fertilizer exactly where you needed it. Talk about multitasking. But here's where it gets really clever. These farmers rotated their livestock through different fields like a well-choreographed dance. Sheep would graze one area down, fertilizing as they went, then move to the next section. The previously grazed land? Perfect for planting crops that absolutely loved all that natural fertilizer. Pigs were the ultimate cleanup crew. They'd root around in harvested fields, eating leftover grain and weeds while churning up the soil like living rototillers. Except these rototillers also produced bacon. Not a bad deal, right? Then there's the genius of using oxen and horses for plowing. Sure, tractors are faster, but these animals kept working even after their plowing days were done. They provided milk, meat, and more little workers for the future. Try getting that return on investment from a John Deere. Medieval farmers understood something we're just remembering. Animals and crops aren't separate businesses, they're partners. The animals ate crop waste, the crops grew better with animal fertilizer, and everybody won. Well, except maybe the animals, but they didn't get much say in medieval business decisions. This wasn't just smart farming, it was survival. Every resource had to pull triple duty because there wasn't a backup plan. No government subsidies, no crop insurance, no emergency grain shipments. But even the most brilliant livestock integration couldn't guarantee success without one crucial element these farmers mastered better than anyone. Ever notice how your grandmother always seemed to know exactly when it was going to rain? Well, medieval farmers had that same sixth sense, except their livelihood depended on it. They couldn't just check the weather app. Their survival literally hung on reading nature's mood swings. These folks developed an almost supernatural ability to predict weather patterns. They watched cloud formations like stock traders watch market graphs. A ring around the moon meant rain within 48 hours. Red sky at night, sailor's delight. Red sky in the morning, time to batten down the hatches. But here's where it gets really clever. Medieval communities created detailed oral calendars that tracked seasonal patterns across generations. Grandpa's great-grandfather's wisdom about when the last frost would hit got passed down like family heirlooms. This wasn't just folklore, it was meteorological data collected over centuries. They planted by lunar cycles, too, understanding something modern science now confirms. Moon phases actually affect plant growth and soil moisture. Full moon planting for above-ground crops, new moon for root vegetables. Sounds like witchcraft, but it's actually brilliant agricultural timing. The really smart farmers kept detailed mental notes about microclimates on their land. They knew that corner near the oak tree always stayed warmer, while the slope by the creek froze first. This hyperlocal knowledge meant they could extend growing seasons and protect vulnerable crops. What's fascinating is how accurate they were. Medieval harvest records showed these weather-watching farmers had success rates that would make modern meteorologists jealous. They had to be right. One bad call could mean starvation. Today's farmers still use many of these techniques, just with fancy instruments backing up ancient wisdom. Weather stations and satellite data confirm what medieval farmers figured out through pure observation and necessity. But timing wasn't just about weather. These medieval agricultural masters had another trick that revolutionized farming forever, and it involves something you might find surprising in your own backyard. You know how your grandmother always saved the best tomatoes for next year's seeds? Well, she was basically running a medieval seed laboratory without even knowing it. Those old farmers weren't just randomly grabbing whatever fell on the ground. They were agricultural detectives hunting down the absolute champions of their crop kingdom. Medieval farmers would walk through their fields like talent scouts at a beauty pageant. They'd spot the wheat that stood tallest during storms, the barley that laughed in the face of drought, and the peas that produced so many pods they practically needed their own zip code. These weren't accidents. They were genetic gold mines waiting to be discovered. But here's where it gets clever. They didn't just save any old seeds. No, sir. They'd wait for the perfect harvest day, select only the plumpest, healthiest specimens, then dry and store them with the care you'd give your favorite reading glasses. Some families guarded their seed collections like state secrets, passing down varieties through generations. Think about it. Without fancy laboratories or scientific degrees, these farmers were essentially breeding supercrops. They understood something we're still learning today. The best plants make the best babies. Makes sense, right? The results were nothing short of spectacular. Communities that practiced smart seed selection could boost their yields by 20 to 30% compared to their neighbors who just planted whatever was handy. That's the difference between surviving winter and throwing a harvest festival. Medieval monasteries became the Fort Knox of seed preservation. Monks would catalog different varieties, trade seeds across vast distances, and maintain detailed records that would make modern botanists weep with joy. They created the world's first seed banks, centuries before anyone thought to call them that. And the weird part is, modern heirloom vegetables are often direct descendants of these carefully preserved medieval varieties. Your great-great-great-grandmother's beans might literally be growing in today's organic gardens. Speaking of things that survived the ages, medieval farmers had another trick up their sleeves that would make today's pest control companies nervous. Medieval farmers weren't exactly shopping at the local pesticide store, right? They had to get creative with bugs trying to devour their crops. And boy, did they figure out some clever tricks that would make modern organic farmers jealous. Here's the thing about medieval pest control. It was like running a tiny ecosystem instead of declaring chemical warfare. These farmers noticed that certain birds absolutely loved munching on crop-destroying insects. So what did they do? Built nesting boxes and encouraged birds to set up shop right in their fields. Free pest control service 24/7. But wait, it gets better. They discovered companion planting worked like having bodyguards for your vegetables. Plant marigolds next to your tomatoes. Those bright flowers literally repel harmful insects while attracting the good guys who eat the bad guys. It's nature's version of hiring security. Medieval farmers also mastered the art of timing. They learned when certain pests showed up and planned accordingly. Kind of like knowing your annoying neighbor's schedule so you can avoid awkward conversations, except with bugs. The really smart ones use trap crops, basically sacrificial plants that pests preferred over the main harvest. Think of it as offering burglars a fake wallet while hiding the real cash. Insects would swarm these decoy plants, leaving the actual food crops alone. They even figured out biological warfare without knowing the science behind it. Farmers would collect pest-eating insects and release them strategically. Ladybugs became tiny hired assassins against aphids. What blows my mind is how they handled soil-dwelling pests. Crop rotation confused underground critters who expected their favorite meal in the same spot every year. Surprise! Your dinner moved across the field. These techniques work so well that modern integrated pest management basically copy-pasted medieval methods and added fancy scientific names. Today's organic farms use almost identical strategies, encouraging beneficial insects, companion planting, and biological controls. The medieval approach proves something important. Sometimes the old ways aren't just nostalgic, they're genuinely superior to our chemical-heavy modern alternatives.